He never made more than $20,000 a year. Never went to college. Never once bragged about what he was building. But for 40 years, he showed up, packed his lunch, bought stocks, paid off properties. And when he finally walked away from his job, there was no party, no headline, just $3.1 million in quiet wealth. This is the story of discipline, dignity, and the kind of freedom no one saw coming. Watch now. The Janitor Who Quietly Built a $3 million portfolio. Only on Dollar by Dollar. The elevator doors opened with a quiet chime. It was just past 5 a.m., the hour when the world still whispered, when office buildings slept, and when only ghosts and janitors wandered the halls. Robert Ellison stepped out with a mop bucket in one hand and a ring of keys jangling from his belt. The marble floors of the corporate tower gleamed under the soft yellow lights. He had polished them 1,000 times. And yet, today, they looked different. Because this would be his last day. 62 years old. 41 years of service. And almost no one knew his name. He walked slowly, like he always did. Not because he was tired, but because that's how you preserved your strength when you worked on your feet 12 hours a day. The cleaning cart rolled ahead of him, the wheels squeaking with every push. On the 24th floor, cubicles sprawled in tight rows. Coffee mugs left overnight. Chairs askew. Monitors asleep. The quiet hum of air conditioning, the only sound besides his footsteps. In an hour, executives would arrive. Men in suits, women in heels. They'd greet each other, unlock screens, talk about markets and mergers. None of them knew the man who had more money than all, but a few of them combined. $3.2 million. Robert, just Bobby to the few who ever really spoke to him, had amassed that silently, patiently, cleaning toilets, mopping floors, saving scraps, investing with precision. Not a soul in that tower had ever guessed. He liked it that way, because Bobby didn't chase wealth for flash. He chased it for freedom. And freedom, he learned, doesn't announce itself. It tiptoes in quietly. Like him, he paused outside the corner office, room 2402. Mahogany desk, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows. It belonged to Mr. Cranfield, the VP of investments. Bobby had cleaned this room for years. He'd emptied its trash cans, dusted its shelves stacked with books like The Intelligent Investor and Rich Dad Poor Dad. Funny thing was, Bobby had read both. Twice. He remembered the first time, sitting in the employee lounge, the book hidden behind a copy of the building's maintenance manual. No one noticed. No one cared. But Bobby noticed. He always noticed. He saw which executives stayed late. He saw which ones barked orders and which ones brought in lunch for the interns. He saw who looked panicked on market crash days, who printed out spreadsheets with trembling hands. And over 4 decades, he watched, like a monk watching clouds pass, and learned. Bobby's first stock was bought in 1984. 10 shares of Johnson & Johnson. Cost him nearly a week's wages. He didn't tell anyone. Didn't want advice. He just wanted to try. He held those shares for 37 years. Along the way, he bought others. Quietly. Consistently. Blue chips. Dividend payers. Then index funds when they came around. A little real estate, too. A tiny duplex in a rough part town. Then another. Each paycheck, a little went in. Not much, but more than nothing. And that's how it built. Dollar by dollar. He never drove a new car. Never took expensive vacations. He brown-bagged his lunches for 41 years. Ate the same tuna sandwich nearly every Tuesday. He wore the same work boots until they cracked. People called that frugal. He called it free. And now, standing outside Mr. Cranfield's office, worth $400,000 a year, give or take bonuses, Bobby smiled. Because today was his last day cleaning this building. He wouldn't be here tomorrow. There would be no party. No retirement speech. He'd slip out just like he slipped in, unseen, uncelebrated. And he liked it that way. Because Bobby's reward wasn't applause. It wasn't even the money, not really. It was the choice. The choice to wake up tomorrow and walk anywhere he wanted. To sit under a tree. To buy coffee and not check the price. To sleep in without guilt. To give quietly. To help someone who reminded him of himself. That was wealth. And it didn't come all at once. It came floor by floor. Year by year. Stock by stock. Sacrifice by sacrifice. And no one had seen it coming. Except Bobby. He moved down the hall, mop in hand, humming a tune from the radio. Something old and sweet. And behind him, The building stirred to life. Lights flicked on. Doors opened. Voices filled the silence. But Bobby didn't look back. Because free men don't have to. Before the portfolio, before the compounding, before the dividends and the quiet rental checks, there was just a mop and a man. In 1982, Robert Bobby Ellison was 21 years old, fresh out of high school with calloused hands and an even tougher home life. He found work where he could get it. That meant night shifts, bleach buckets, and scraping gum off tile floors in Midtown Atlanta. He wasn't mad about it, not even bitter. That's the part that surprised people later when they found out the size of his bank account. He was proud of the work. The work was clean, even if he got dirty doing it. You do it right, or don't do it at all, his mother used to say. She had passed 2 years prior. Liver failure. The bills from her hospital stay still came sometimes, addressed to a house Bobby no longer lived in. So he worked. He worked through cold winters and long summer nights, through birthdays and holidays, through power outages and breakups, and the day he got a letter from the county saying he owed $168 in unpaid fines, something about car tags he never got around to. His coworkers were mostly invisible to the office staff. No one talked to the janitors unless something was broken or smelled bad. But Bobby noticed things. He noticed how the men in suits came in early and left late. He noticed which names were on the doors and which names were whispered in elevator conversations. And then one night, Bobby saw something that changed him. It was after midnight. He was cleaning the 12th floor conference room, vacuum humming in his ears, when he spotted a man alone inside. The room was dark, but the desk lamp was on. Papers were spread out. The man, a white guy in his 50s with a comb-over and wire glasses, was scribbling numbers, fast and feverishly, on a legal pad. Bobby paused. The vacuum motor slowed to a stop. Something about the man's focus caught his eye. He leaned the vacuum against the wall and knocked gently. The man looked up, startled, then waved him in. "You can finish. I'm just working on projections." Bobby nodded and vacuumed the carpet around him in silence. Then, as he turned to leave, the man said, "You ever invest in stocks?" Bobby blinked. "No, sir," he said. The man smiled. "Should think about it. Time's your greatest asset. You're young. That's the secret." Bobby didn't know what to say. He nodded again and left. But that moment stayed with him. He thought about it all the way home. Time is your greatest asset. Not money. Not luck. Not talent. Time. The next day, Bobby took a bus to the library. He checked out a book with a plain black cover. The Richest Man in Babylon. The librarian, a woman named Mrs. Carpenter, smiled at him as she stamped the return slip. "Good choice," she said. "That one changed my son's life." Bobby devoured the book in 2 days. Then he read Think and Grow Rich. Then The Wealthy Barber. None of them told him how to get rich cleaning toilets. But they taught him something else. That wealth wasn't just a number. It was a habit, a mindset, a way of seeing time and money like seeds, not chains. And so Bobby began planting. He opened his first savings account with $50. Then he asked the bank manager, an old man with thick glasses, how to buy a stock. The man laughed. Not cruelly, just surprised. "You need to call a broker. There's a firm 2 blocks down, Merrill Lynch. Minimum investment is usually a few hundred." Bobby saved for 2 more months. Then he walked into Merrill Lynch and bought his first stock, 10 shares of Johnson & Johnson. They mailed him the certificate. He kept it folded inside a shoebox under his bed. Every few days, he'd take it out, unfold it, and read it like scripture. It wasn't the money. It was the proof that he could own something, that his mop didn't define his worth, that even in a world that never saw him, he could carve out a piece of it, quietly, patiently, over time. He kept working, kept saving. He didn't understand all the jargon, but he understood the rhythm. Pay yourself first. Don't spend what you don't have. Invest in what you understand. Let time do the rest. He still rode the bus, still brought peanut butter sandwiches to work, still lived in a rented room with peeling paint and a leaky sink. But something had shifted. He no longer saw himself as poor. He saw himself as building. Each dollar was a brick, each stock a beam, each choice a hammer strike. And every morning when he picked up the mop again, it felt lighter somehow. Because Bobby wasn't cleaning for minimum wage anymore. He was building something no one could see. Yet, by 1985, Bobby had a system. Every payday, before he paid rent, before he paid the electric bill, Before he even bought groceries, Bobby Ellison sent 10% of his check somewhere else. Into the future. That's what he called it. Paying the future Bobby. He didn't have much. A modest paycheck. Maybe $200 a week after taxes. And yet, every Friday, he walked into a small community bank and handed over 2 crisp 20s. Long-term deposit, he'd say. The teller would smile, knowing he was the only janitor in the building putting money into investments instead of asking for an advance. That's how he became known, at least quietly, in whispers, as the brown bag millionaire. Not because he had $1 million. Not yet. But because he always showed up at lunch with the same thing. A brown paper bag, carefully folded, with one of 3 possible contents. Tuna sandwich and an apple. Peanut butter and jelly with crackers. Or, on special days, leftover spaghetti. It wasn't about deprivation. Bobby didn't hate eating out. He just understood something most people didn't. Every lunch he didn't buy was a future he could afford later. His coworkers mocked him at first. Not cruelly, just playfully. "You ever eat anything hot, Bobby?" one guy joked, waving a cheeseburger in his face. Bobby just smiled. "I'll be eating hot when I'm retired at 55, he said. They laughed, but he didn't. He meant it. It wasn't about being cheap. It was about being free. That's the part people misunderstood. Bobby wasn't denying himself joy. He was choosing which joys to delay. The joy of waking up one day and not having to punch a clock. The joy of saying no thanks to overtime. The joy of giving away money anonymously. The joy of time. That was the most radical thing Bobby ever realized. That time was more valuable than money. And every time he chose the brown bag, he bought a little more of it. He read about compound interest in the library again, this time in Money magazine. There was an article with a chart showing how $100 invested each month could grow into over $100,000 in 20 years. Bobby didn't blink. He just leaned back, folded the magazine open to that page, and read it 10 more times. He didn't have $100 per month, but he had $40. And $40 over 20 years. Well, it wouldn't be $1 million, but it would be something. And something was better than nothing. The idea caught fire in him. He opened a DRIP plan, dividend reinvestment plan. Started with Coca-Cola. They paid dividends, and he liked their philosophy. He didn't drink it much, but he sure saw everyone else did. Then Procter & Gamble. Then McDonald's. Each quarter, a few dollars would appear in his statement. Tiny payments from these giants, sent to him just for being an owner. At first, it was laughable. $2.17 from Johnson & Johnson. $3.94 from McDonald's. $1.08 from P&G. Most people wouldn't notice it. They'd scoff. What can you do with $3? But Bobby didn't laugh. He reinvested every cent. Because he knew that every small dividend was more than a few dollars. It was proof. Proof that he wasn't just a worker anymore. He was a shareholder. A quiet participant in the economy. And no one could take that from him. Each time he got a dividend, he'd sit quietly in his room and whisper, "Thank you." Like a prayer. Like an affirmation. Like he was speaking to the future version of himself, decades away, smiling under a tree. And slowly, the numbers grew. By the end of 1985, Bobby's net worth was just under $3,000. Most of it in stocks. Some in a small emergency fund. No debt. No car note. No credit card bills. And no one knew. Not his coworkers. Not his landlord. Not even the cousin he helped with rent sometimes. Because Bobby didn't talk about money. He just moved through life with a quiet discipline. Every night, before bed, he'd look over his finances in a little black notebook. Each page marked with dates, deposits, and stock symbols. He'd draw tiny arrows to mark dividends. Stars for increases. Circles around mistakes. And once a month, he'd open a separate page. A vision board in words only. And write 3 goals. Retire early. Own 2 rental properties. Give away $100,000 in his lifetime. He didn't know how. Didn't know when. But he believed. Because Bobby wasn't chasing millions. He was chasing mastery. The mastery of himself. And every brown bag lunch was a victory. It was 1989, and Atlanta was swelling. Rent prices inching upward. New buildings popping up like weeds. More traffic. More noise. More people chasing bigger paychecks in glass towers. Bobby Ellison didn't chase much. But he noticed the shifts. The quiet ones. The rent increases posted in the lobby. The landlord's new BMW. The eviction notices that went up 2 floors down. The way people moved out and new ones came in quicker now. And then one day, on a walk back from work, he saw it. A duplex. Dilapidated. Beige paint peeling like sunburn. One mailbox hanging off with rust. A hand-painted for sale by owner sign, crooked and sun-faded in the grass. It looked more like a warning than an invitation. Bobby stopped and stared. The yard was overgrown. The windows had bars. The front step was cracked. But something about it held him. Not in beauty, but in potential. He called the number that night. $38,000. The man on the other end said. Needs work. One side rented, the other's empty. You interested? Bobby didn't answer at first. He had $11,200 saved. Most in index funds, some in a CD, a few hundred in a shoebox. The idea was absurd. He was a janitor, but he'd been reading. About cash flow. About equity. About how the wealthy bought assets. And here stood one, rough and real and waiting. The next day he walked back, knocked on the door. The owner, Mr. Julius Reed, was a weary man with smoker's skin and tax trouble in his eyes. He let Bobby walk through the unit, peeling linoleum, old pipes, a cracked toilet. But the bones were strong. The rent on the occupied side was $275 per month. Bobby asked questions, took notes. He left with a handshake and a fluttering heart. For a week, he didn't sleep well. He ran the numbers over and over in his notebook. $38,000 price. 20% down. $7,600 cash. Closing costs around $1,500. He'd just barely make it. And only if he sold off some of his stocks. It was the first time Bobby hesitated to let go of his investments. But then he remembered what one of his old books had said. Your money must work harder than you do. So Bobby made the call. He sold half his Johnson & Johnson stock, liquidated his CD, took out a secured loan on his savings to cover closing costs. And in the summer of 1989, Bobby Ellison, janitor, brown bagger, quiet saver, became a landlord. It was a disaster at first. The empty side needed new flooring. He spent weekends pulling up rotted carpet, scrubbing mold off baseboards, learning how to reseal a tub from a VHS tape rented from the library. He slept there some nights, on a cot, tools stacked beside him, a flashlight for reading. His co-workers thought he was nuts. Why do you spend your life savings on a dump? One asked in the break room. Bobby smiled. Because it pays me now. He rented the other side out in October for $325 per month. Between both tenants, he brought in $600. After the mortgage and taxes, $88 in cash flow. Not much. But every month, that duplex paid him. Paid him for time he wasn't working. And slowly, the mortgage shrank. The equity grew. It wasn't flashy. The tenants sometimes missed payments. One time, a pipe burst and flooded the floor. Bobby spent a cold November night mopping up sewage and wondering if he'd made a huge mistake. But then came tax season. And for the first time, Bobby got a glimpse of depreciation, of deductions, of how the system rewarded ownership. He ran the numbers again. The duplex didn't just provide shelter. It was a wealth engine. A slow, stubborn one, but a powerful one nonetheless. And more than that, it changed how Bobby saw himself. He wasn't just a janitor. He was a property owner. He had a tenant. He had cash flow. And he had options. That was the most radical part. Options. He could sell, refinance, pull equity, rent higher, trade up. But Bobby didn't do any of that. He just held and maintained and collected rent, year after year. And that duplex, ugly and cracked and humble, became the first major pillar of his future. Because sometimes the biggest bets you ever make are on things no one else wants. And sometimes they're right. By 1993, Bobby Ellison had built a life no one could see. To the world, he was the same, a janitor in creased boots, pushing a mop bucket through marble lobbies, a brown paper bag in hand, soft-spoken, always on time, a man who rarely called in sick and never raised his voice. But beneath the surface, Bobby's life was compounding, and not just in his investment portfolio, in his spirit, in his mindset. The duplex, now 4 years into its slow-paying rhythm, had stabilized. Rent came in like clockwork. Tenants stayed long. The roof had been patched, the plumbing modernized with the help of a friend from church, and Bobby's confidence in the strange world of real estate had grown. He called the property Ellison Unit A and B in his budget book, like it was a company, like he was a CEO. Because, in his mind, and like any good business owner, Bobby diversified. He didn't go out and buy more real estate yet. Not right away. Instead, he returned to his old standby, the stock market. Only now he understood more. He began tracking dividend increases. When Coca-Cola raised their quarterly payout by a penny, Bobby noticed. Not because it changed his life, but because it confirmed something. That time wasn't standing still. Time was building. He enrolled in more drip plans, started reading Morningstar reports from the library, developed a system, high-quality dividend payers, low debt, strong moat, reinvest every payout. By 1995, Bobby's portfolio crossed $25,000. Not huge, but monumental for a man who never made more than $18,000 in a year. He never said a word about it to anyone. But when he walked home from work some nights, after buffing floor tiles for executives who made 10 times his salary, he'd smile softly, thinking, I own pieces of companies those men work for. He didn't think it out of arrogance. He thought it because it made him feel steady, secure. In a world where prices rose, people lost jobs, and rent climbed higher than hope, Bobby had something that grew quietly, whether or not anyone noticed. He started keeping 2 notebooks now. One was financial, just numbers, ledgers, rent logs, dividend receipts. The other? Dreams. That's what he titled it. Inside were simple things. Give $5,000 to the church without anyone knowing. Buy a used truck and pay in cash. Help a young man the way I wish someone had helped me. Sit on a porch without worrying about money. He didn't know how long it would take, but he believed each line was a promise, not a wish. And he believed something else too. That peace wasn't found in numbers. It was found in structure, in having a system that worked when your willpower ran out, in automation, in not having to guess whether you could afford something, because the answer had already been calculated. So Bobby built structure into everything. His paycheck was split automatically, 60% for living, 30% for investing, 10% for giving. Every Friday, he filled out his expense log. Every Sunday, he reviewed his accounts. It didn't take long, maybe an hour each week, but it gave him something no one around him had. Control, not over the world, but over himself. That's what compounding really was. Not just money multiplying, but habits reinforcing, character deepening. And Bobby, year after year, became not just a janitor, but a craftsman of discipline. And while his coworkers bought new gadgets and finance cars, Bobby kept his 1986 Honda Civic running with prayer and elbow grease. It wasn't about scarcity. It was about sovereignty. And as the years passed, Bobby began to see how rare that was. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He didn't care if people thought he was poor. Because wealth, he learned, was what you didn't see. The quiet man, eating lunch alone, he might be the richest one in the building. And more often than not, he was. It was the spring of 2001 when the market began to shudder. The dot-com bubble had stretched too far, too fast. For years, Bobby had watched in silence as headlines screamed about tech stocks doubling overnight. Startups he'd never heard of were going public. People at his building, young professionals with expensive watches and wide-eyed optimism, bragged about online brokerages and internet IPOs. Bobby never touched a single one. He didn't understand tech companies that had no profits. He understood soap, diapers, burgers, toothpaste, dividends. That was enough. Still, the whispers became a storm. Even people who had once mocked his conservative ways were now obsessed with the NASDAQ. You're missing out, Bobby, one said over lunch. This ain't like the old days. It's a new economy. Bobby didn't argue. He just nodded, chewing his sandwich slowly. But when the crash came, when portfolios were slashed in half, when overnight millionaires returned to earth, when layoffs rolled in like thunder, Bobby's portfolio barely blinked. A few dips here and there, but Coke still paid dividends. So did P&G. So did his utility stocks. And that duplex still paid rent. His small world, built on quiet things, held strong. And it changed him, because this was the first time Bobby saw fear on the faces of the confident. He saw a man in a suit crying in the lobby elevator. He saw the layoffs, saw the shock, the silence, the confusion. People who had lived well above their means were suddenly exposed. Lease agreements they couldn't keep, debt they couldn't hide. The difference between income and wealth had never been so clear. And Bobby, he went home to the same apartment, drove the same Civic, ate the same peanut butter sandwich. But now, there was something else in his chest besides confidence. Conviction. That all those small decisions, the lunches skipped, the delayed purchases, the quiet nights with library books and envelopes marked Invest First, they weren't just good ideas. They were shields. He had weathered the storm, and he wanted to do more than survive it. He wanted to learn from it. So Bobby began to study not just investing, but behavior. He checked out The Psychology of Money, a much earlier edition, Common Stocks and Uncommon Profits, and everything he could on financial temperament. He wrote in his notebook, "Markets fall. Minds panic. Stay steady." He started a new habit, something he would keep for the rest of his life. Every time the market dropped by more than 10%, he would buy. No questions. No hesitation. Just a small, automated transfer from his emergency fund into index funds or dividend stocks. Because downturns, he realized, were discounts. Sales. And Bobby didn't fear sales. He embraced them. In 2002, while others waited nervously for recovery, Bobby doubled his contributions. He didn't have much, maybe an extra $50 per month, but it was consistent. He didn't chase bottoms, didn't try to time anything. He just moved forward, one slow, unglamorous step at a time. And here's the thing, nobody noticed. There were no celebrations, no congratulatory emails, no mentors patting him on the back. He was still a janitor, still silent, still invisible to most of the people in the buildings he cleaned. But Bobby knew. He could feel the momentum, because this crash, this storm, had taught him something vital. That the true test of wealth wasn't how much you made in good times. It was how you behaved when everything fell apart. And Bobby had passed, not with brilliance, but with discipline, not with genius, but with grit. It started, as many beautiful things do, with silence. No one knew who left the envelope. No one saw it dropped. No camera footage. No witness. Just a plain white envelope slid under the office door of Principal Carla Ramos at Booker T. Washington High School. Inside, a cashier's check for $5,000. And a note. Handwritten. Slanted penmanship. Careful, almost shy. For the senior with the most grit and the least noise. No GPA requirement. Just heart. Use it for books, boots, or bus fare. Whatever helps you keep going. A former custodian who believes in you. The principal stared at the note for minutes. Not because of the money, though it was generous, but because she recognized the tone. It was someone like her. Someone who'd done hard things the slow way. Someone who saw beyond grades and perfect attendance. Someone who noticed the invisible kid, the quiet one, the working one, the student who cleaned up the cafeteria after others had gone. Word spread quickly, but there was no return address. No email. No name. Only the signature. A former custodian. No one ever guessed it was Bobby. And that's exactly how he wanted it. It had been over 2 decades since Bobby walked the halls of that very school. Same cracked lockers. Same worn linoleum. Same buzz of the lights in the hallway that never got fixed. He used to sweep those floors after class when his mother picked up shifts at the hospital and couldn't get him until late. Back then, the janitor was Mr. Leon. Kind eyes. Always gave Bobby an extra carton of milk if there were leftovers. He never forgot that. 1 carton. Quiet gesture. Done without fanfare. Sometimes it's not the size of the help, but the way it's offered, without spotlight. Bobby carried that memory like currency. So when his net worth hit 6 figures, yes, 6, after all those years of slow, deliberate investing, he didn't splurge. He tithed quietly. And then, he gave. He remembered that voice in his head. Help a young man the way I wish someone had helped me. And that's what he did. The first recipient of the Grit Without Noise award was a 17-year-old girl named Tanisha. She worked weekends at a laundromat, took care of her little brother, had a 2.4 GPA, was never late, wrote poetry in the margins of her chemistry notes. She'd applied to 3 local colleges, couldn't afford application fees for more. When they called her into the office and handed her the envelope, she cried. Not loud tears, just the soft kind, where your breath shortens and your hands tremble. I've never gotten anything before, she whispered. That year, Bobby stayed 3 blocks away from the school that morning, sipping coffee at a diner. He watched from the window as the students walked in, backpacks bouncing, some dragging feet, some full of fire. He smiled. He didn't need to be there. Didn't need applause or thanks. He just needed to know that somewhere inside those walls, a seed had been planted. He ordered pancakes, paid in cash, left a $20 tip, and walked home in the sunlight, hands in pockets, feeling like a rich man in all the ways that mattered. Giving changed Bobby, not in the way winning the lottery changes people. Not suddenly, but like a room you clean once a day. You don't notice at first, but over time, it feels different, lighter. Every time he gave anonymously, he felt closer to the version of himself he'd always wanted to be. The man who could say, I did this with sweat, patience, and choices, and now I'm giving it back. He didn't need wealth for recognition. He needed it for impact. That became his new wealth metric. Not dollars in the brokerage account, but moments created through them. He began budgeting for giving, just like he budgeted for groceries. Line item, help. It was never huge. $50 here, $200 there. He once paid a single mom's electricity bill after overhearing her worry in the post office line. Left cash in an envelope on her windshield. No note. He started calling it his silent legacy. And over the years, it grew. He funded GED testing fees for janitorial interns, bought school supplies for building staff kids, always through anonymous Amazon orders, tipped waitresses 100% if he caught them being kind to someone struggling, because Bobby knew what it felt like to be invisible, to be the one who showed up early and stayed late and still didn't get noticed. He couldn't fix the whole world, but he could tilt it gently for one person at a time, and he did. People around him began to notice something, not the giving, but the peace. There was a stillness to Bobby that you couldn't buy in stores or mimic with confidence. He walked like a man who owed nothing to anyone, because he didn't. His mortgage was paid, the duplex now fully owned, his portfolio crossing into the high six figures, and his soul, unburdened. It showed in how he spoke, measured, kind, no rush to prove anything. One day, a young temp janitor named Carlos asked him, Mr. Bobby, how you always so chill? Bobby smiled. I learned to live on less than I make. Now I ain't afraid of losing nothing. Carlos blinked. That didn't make sense to him yet, but Bobby knew one day it might. Back at the high school, the grit without noise envelope arrived again the next year, and the next. Never the same check amount, but always enough, and always the same signature. A former custodian who believes in you. Some students thought it was fake. Some teachers swore it was an angel. But the principal? She suspected something. She'd seen Bobby once, years ago, standing outside the school fence during morning drop-off, just watching. He was an alumni donor. Wasn't on any PTA list. But his eyes, those eyes said everything. So she kept his secret. Because some gifts don't need names to be felt. And Bobby? He kept going. One mop stroke at a time. One dividend reinvested. One envelope passed, without a name. Because giving, he believed, was the highest form of wealth. Not what you show, but what you sow. In the world of finance, everyone talks about timing. When to buy, when to sell, when to jump in or pull out. But Bobby Ellison, he bet on something else. Not timing. Time. That's the lesson he held tighter than any investment strategy, tighter than any book or quote. Because while others were chasing perfect entry points, Bobby was busy planting seeds. And he never once dug them up to check on the roots. By 2005, Bobby was in his mid-40s. His portfolio had just crossed $200,000. Not quickly, not dramatically, but with the consistency of sunrise and coffee. He still lived simply, still mopped floors, still wore the same steel-toe boots that squeaked near the elevator on the 15th floor of the Midtown Tower. And still almost no one knew. There was a young analyst on the 17th floor named Rachel. Friendly. Always said hello. Always left her desk clean. One evening, she caught Bobby standing by the window during his break, staring out at the city below. Beautiful, isn't it? She said. Sure is, he replied. Then she noticed something. He wasn't looking at the skyline. He was looking at a modest apartment complex 2 blocks away. That where you live? No, he said softly. That's one of mine. She blinked. One of your what? He looked over, smiled gently, and nodded. Properties. Bought that one in '99. Duplex. Rented ever since. Rachel didn't know what to say. She looked at his uniform, his janitor cart, his tired hands, and then back at the man who, apparently, owned real estate 2 blocks from her office. You're joking, she whispered. Nope. And that was all he said. He didn't brag, didn't explain, just turned and went back to work. But it planted something in her, just like it had once been planted in him. Bobby went home that night, made his usual dinner, baked chicken, steamed greens, a side of rice, and sat down with his notebook. Not the one filled with numbers. The other one. The dream journal. He flipped to the back page. 3 lines stared back at him. Retire early. Own 2 rental properties. Give away $100,000 in his lifetime. 2 boxes were now checked. The third? He was getting close. And he was still only 46. He smiled. He wasn't rich by Silicon Valley standards. Didn't have a yacht or a country club pass. But he didn't want those things. He wanted freedom. And freedom, Bobby had learned, isn't about what you can afford. It's about what you no longer have to fear. There were downturns. The housing bubble loomed. The market rose on shaky legs. People borrowed too much, flipped too fast, chased too hard. Bobby watched it all like a fisherman watches the sky. He didn't panic. He just stayed the course. Because he knew what others forgot. Markets go up. Markets go down. But discipline is undefeated. He used index funds now more than ever. Low fee, broad-based, automatic reinvestments. He kept his old individual stocks, his Johnson & Johnson, his Coca-Cola, his Procter & Gamble, but he no longer chased winners. He just added to his holdings slowly, quietly, and without drama. He created rules for himself. Never sell in panic. Never invest based on headlines. Always have 6 months of expenses in cash. Only increase lifestyle after increasing investments. And most importantly, automate everything. Because Bobby believed you shouldn't have to rely on willpower every week. Systems are stronger than moods. So his paycheck, still modest, still from janitorial work, hit his account every other Friday and split itself automatically. 60% to checking, 30% to investment accounts, 10% to giving. No questions, no exceptions. Because Bobby had made a vow long ago to protect future Bobby from present Bobby's impulses. That's what no one tells you about money. That it's not about math. It's about behavior, habits, and time. Time to learn, time to fail, time to heal from financial scars, time to grow slowly enough that you don't notice until one day you look up and you're free. He remembered reading about compound interest back in the 80s. The quote stuck with him. Compound interest is the 8th wonder of the world. He who understands it, earns it. Bobby didn't need to finish the quote. He lived it. Because every $10 he saved, every $40 he invested, every $300 check he didn't blow, that was a soldier's sin into the world, fighting for his freedom. And every dividend, a whisper from the future. You're getting there. By 2006, he bought another small property, a triplex, rundown, vacant. He cleaned it up himself, painted the walls, repaired the flooring. Took 2 months off overtime to do it. It filled quickly. Rent checks arrived. Cash flow improved. He added a rental tab to his spreadsheet and smiled. This time, he didn't even tell anyone. He just walked a little taller through the halls. Not arrogantly, just lighter. He knew what few did. That you don't have to be loud to be free. You just have to be consistent. And let time work its quiet magic. The headlines screamed louder than ever. Markets crash. Lehman Brothers collapses. Global meltdown imminent. It was October 2008. The kind of October that turned blue skies gray and retirement plans to ash. Bank accounts shrank. 401(k)s crumbled. Panic became a background noise that never stopped. But in a quiet corner of Atlanta, a janitor named Bobby Ellison held the line. He'd seen downturns before. He remembered 2001. Remembered Black Monday, even if vaguely. He remembered watching coworkers flinch every time they refreshed their stock screens. But this was different. This was chaos with a pulse. People were crying in bathrooms, whispering about layoffs, packing boxes before the pink slips even arrived. Even some of the executives, those whose suits cost more than Bobby's monthly budget, were suddenly quiet, defensive, asking strange questions out loud like, is it too late to sell? But Bobby? He did what he always did. He clocked in. He pushed his cart. He cleaned floors while the world fell apart. And when he got home, he bought more stock. It wasn't bravado. It was math. It was behavior. It was discipline forged over decades. Because Bobby remembered what most have forgotten. That fear is expensive. That panic sells at a discount. That wealth waits for those who are willing to sit in the fire. He opened his investment account and bought more index funds. The market was down 30%. That meant, in his mind, that everything was on sale. And Bobby loved a sale. He pulled $5,000 from his cash reserves and split it, half into dividend stocks, half into total market ETFs. And then he walked outside and sat under a tree, not to celebrate, but to center himself, because the storm wasn't over. In December, he got the news. Budget cuts, cleaning staff hours slashed. His shift would go from 40 hours a week to 24. Some coworkers were livid. Others panicked. Bobby just nodded. He had savings. More than that, he had income streams. The duplex, the triplex, dividends. He sat in the break room with a notepad, scribbling new numbers, adjusting, rebalancing. He didn't flinch, because he built a life designed for storms. When others cut expenses for the first time, Bobby had already been living lean for 25 years. He didn't have to sell stocks. He didn't have to sell real estate. He didn't even have to worry. He just adapted, moved the 10% he usually gave into his emergency fund, held off on a small renovation he had planned, tightened lunch spending, back to peanut butter and bananas, and stayed the course. The market dropped another 10%, then 20%. Bobby didn't change a thing. Each month, he bought more, because he knew something deeper now, something that had been carved into him over years of repetition. You don't become wealthy by never losing money. You become wealthy by never panicking when you do. By the summer of 2009, while the world slowly crawled out of the wreckage, Bobby's investments were already recovering. And by 2010, he was ahead, way ahead. The duplex had appreciated. The triplex was fully rented. His dividend income had reached nearly $400 per month. And his portfolio, well over $350,000. The janitor, they said, was lucky. But Bobby knew luck had nothing to do with it. He had held the line, not because he was smarter, but because he was prepared. Prepared to feel the fear and not move. Prepared to trust the plan he made when things were calm. Prepared to watch the world burn and still plant seeds. And when people later asked him how he stayed so calm, he would only ever say one thing. I didn't build my life for good times. He'd pause. I built it for all times. That was Bobby's secret. He didn't aim to win. He aimed to survive. To hold his ground while others gave theirs up. To inch forward when the rest of the world ran backward. And when the dust settled, he was still standing. Not flashy, not famous, but free. You could walk past him 100 times and never know. That's the thing about legacies. The most lasting ones don't announce themselves. They ripple, quietly, through rooms, through people, through time. By 2012, Bobby Ellison had become a quiet fixture. Not just in the building, in the lives of others. Without trying, without asking, without anyone realizing it. Carlos, the young temp janitor from years back, was now managing a small custodial crew. He still remembered Bobby's words. I learned to live on less than I make. Now I ain't afraid of losing nothing. He wrote that down, taped it inside his wallet. It changed him. He opened a Roth IRA the year after, and he still packed his lunches. Then there was Rachel, the analyst from the 17th floor. She had started investing in index funds after that strange elevator conversation. She'd tell the story at brunch sometimes. There was this janitor, Bobby. Guy owned real estate, had dividend stocks, knew more than anyone in the finance department. I swear. People would laugh. But Rachel didn't laugh when she maxed out her 401k for the first time in 2011. Didn't laugh when her emergency fund helped her leave a toxic job 2 years later. Didn't laugh when she bought her first home with 20% down, no PMI, and tears in her eyes. She thought of Bobby when she crossed the threshold, and she whispered, "Thank you." He didn't hear it, but somehow he felt it. That's how Bobby's legacy worked. It didn't show up in plaques, or newspaper articles, or retirement parties with cake and cheap balloons. It showed up in changed habits, in smaller credit card bills, in kids who watched their parents finally breathe. It showed up when someone said no to a flashy car and yes to paying off debt. When someone skipped the restaurant and invested the difference. When someone said, "What would Bobby do?" That was the legacy. Invisible, but everywhere. And Bobby never claimed credit. He just kept walking the same slow, quiet steps. Same up, same lunch, same notebook. But now something had shifted. There were more notes in the dream section than ever before. Notes like, Teach one person per year how to invest. Write a letter to my 20-year-old self. Leave a scholarship fund. Forgive the debt I hold. In 2012, he paid off the triplex in full. Used proceeds from dividend reinvestments and rent savings. No mortgage. Full ownership. When his tenants thanked him for not raising the rent, he just nodded. I remember what it's like to hope rent don't go up. And he left it there. One of the tenants, a single mom named Patrice, later used her stable housing to go back to school. 2 years later, she became a nurse. She sent Bobby a thank you card. He never told her he framed it. Legacy, Bobby learned, isn't what you leave behind. It's what you plant while you're still here. The actions, the routines, the advice people carry without realizing it came from you. It's the way you model possibility. The way your stillness teaches someone else how to breathe. By now, Bobby's portfolio had crossed $700,000. Between his properties and investments, his net worth neared $1.2 million. But he still rode the same bus route to work. Still read books from the library. Still filled out his financial tracker every Sunday morning. He didn't need to prove anything. He was already living proof that you could be a millionaire and no one would know. That you could be powerful and unnoticed. That wealth wasn't about appearance. It was about options. And Bobby had plenty. But more than that, he had purpose. One night, a young employee in the building, a marketing assistant named Jordan, caught Bobby in the elevator. "You that guy, right?" Bobby looked up, tired but polite. "Which guy?" "The janitor who owns, like, half the block." Jordan laughed. Bobby smiled. Didn't confirm. Didn't deny. Jordan continued. "I just started investing. Roth IRA, a little VTI. Got the idea from someone who told me about you." Bobby nodded slowly. "You're on the right track," he said. "Wish I started earlier." Bobby looked at him gently. "You're starting now. That's enough." And it was. The elevator doors opened. Bobby stepped out. And behind him, a ripple widened. It happened on a Wednesday. Just a normal day. Humid. Atlanta's late summer heat buzzing against the windows of Bobby's apartment. He'd just finished cleaning the last unit of his triplex, fixed a leaky faucet, swapped out a broken light switch. His back ached in that familiar way. The one that whispered, "You've been doing this a long time, old man." He wiped his hands clean, sat at the small kitchen table, and opened his black notebook. There it was. The same spreadsheet layout he'd been copying by hand for nearly 3 decades. Left column, net worth tracker. Right column, monthly cash flow. Bottom, notes to self. He'd updated it every month like clockwork. Never missed a single one. Not even during the crash. Not even during layoffs. Not even when he was too tired to cook. And now, he stared at the number at the top. $1,989,214. He blinked. Read it again. Almost $2 million. His breath caught somewhere between disbelief and amusement. 2 million. And then, right on cue, his dividend spreadsheet pinged. A quarterly payout had hit. Johnson & Johnson, $312.76. Just like that. For doing nothing, but holding steady for 27 years. Bobby leaned back in his chair and laughed. Not a loud laugh. Not boastful. Just one of those soft, disbelieving laughs that said, "You really did it," without ever leaving the night shift. That night, he sat under the ceiling fan in the living room, pen in hand, and ran the numbers again. How much did he need to live? His current monthly expenses, housing, food, insurance, giving, incidentals, totaled just under $2,200 per month. He lived small, paid cash, drove a paid-off Toyota, ate simple, still donated monthly. And his cash flow, between his 2 rental properties and dividends, he was earning $2,480 per month, after expenses, taxes, and reserves. More than enough. More than he needed. More than he dreamed of. The numbers didn't lie. He had reached it. The freedom number. That invisible finish line he'd been working toward since he was 21 and mopping floors in silence. He didn't cheer. Didn't buy champagne. Didn't even tell anyone. He just sat there, feeling something so rare it felt almost sacred. Enough. That was it. That was the real treasure. Not the millions. Not the accounts. Not the buildings. It was the quiet assurance that he no longer worked for survival. That his days were his. That he could wake up tomorrow and not ask permission. That no boss, no shift change, no budget cut could unseat him. Because he had built something permanent. Not flashy, but solid. stone by stone, page by page, dollar by dollar. And now it was his. Every cent. He picked up his phone, thought about calling someone. But who? He had no wife, no kids. His sister had passed 2 years ago. A couple of friends at church, sure. A few neighbors. But this wasn't a moment to announce. It was a moment to breathe. He walked outside. The street was quiet. Cicadas chirped in the bushes. He looked up at the sky, a low gold-pink stretch over the rooftops. And for the first time in 41 years, Bobby didn't feel tired from work. He felt lifted, not weightless, but rooted. Rooted in choice, rooted in dignity, rooted in the fact that he had done it the hard way, the long way, and no one could take it from him. That weekend, he made a new list in his notebook. Now that I'm free, sleep until 7 a.m., go to the park on Tuesdays, volunteer to teach budgeting at the rec center, visit Charleston, eat seafood, watch boats, write my story, even if no one reads it, give $10,000 to someone who will never know it came from me. He paused before that last one, then added, and do it every year until I can't. Bobby didn't retire the next day, didn't quit in dramatic fashion. He kept working another 6 months, to finish strong, to leave well. But something changed. His walk was different, his eyes lighter, not because he had won something, but because he had released something. The need to prove, the fear of falling, the pressure to survive, all gone. He still brought his lunch in a brown paper bag, still wore the same boots, still punched in at the same time. But every mop stroke now whispered, "You're free." And that was worth more than anything money could ever buy. There was no sheet cake, no streamers, no awkwardly signed card passed around the office. On his final day at the building, the same glass tower he'd cleaned for more than 3 decades, Bobby Ellison clocked in like any other Tuesday. 5 a.m. sharp. His boots squeaked faintly across the polished floor. His cart rolled smoothly behind him, freshly oiled wheels, nothing rattling, just the soft hum of his quiet, practiced rhythm. He stopped at the janitor's closet, took out his mop, and began working through the motions one last time. No announcement, no speech, no farewell email. And that's how he wanted it. Because Bobby never needed applause to do something well. He just needed to know he'd done it right. The building had changed over the years. Tenants came and went. New logos on the glass. Fresh coats of paint. Tech startups moved in. Law firms expanded. But Bobby stayed. He saw it all. Watched interns become VPs. Watched careers blossom and collapse. Watched new hires come in with fancy coffee. And watched them leave with cardboard boxes months later. But he never envied. He observed, learned. And now, on his last day, as the early light filtered in through the atrium windows and caught the shine of the floor tiles he'd cleaned for 40 years, Bobby just smiled. No one knew that the man pushing the mop down the hall had a portfolio north of $2 million, that he owned multiple properties, paid off in full, that his dividends paid more per month than his paycheck ever did, that he was free and had been for some time. But Bobby didn't need them to know. He wasn't retiring to be celebrated. He was retiring because he'd already won. He stopped at the 24th floor. One of the newer startups had moved in last year. Colorful beanbags, free snacks, a table tennis setup. He had once walked past 2 20-somethings complaining about the lack of kombucha in the fridge. He smiled to himself. He remembered a time when he didn't have enough for real milk, let alone fermented tea. And yet, here he was. Content. Because the measure of a man, Bobby believed, was never in what he demanded, but in what he endured and what he chose not to flaunt. Around 9:45 a.m., he paused by the executive conference room. He had mopped this floor so many times, he could do it with his eyes closed. The room was empty. He stepped inside, set the mop down, took one slow turn around the room, hands in pockets, then reached into his work vest, pulled out a small envelope, taped it to the back of the door where no one would see it right away. Inside, a typed letter on plain white paper. No signature, just a note. This building taught me more than any school could. I cleaned your offices while I studied your habits. I learned how not to spend. I learned how to buy stocks and wait. I learned how to build a life that doesn't depend on applause. I leave today with no regrets. Just a quiet thank you. You didn't see me, but I saw you. And I used it to build freedom. Bobby. He left it there. Walked out. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't want to. His supervisor texted him at noon. "Hey Bobby, are you taking off early?" Bobby replied simply, Taking off for good. Appreciate everything. The dots pulsed, then stopped, then appeared again. Wait, are you retiring? Yep. Last shift today. Man, you didn't say anything. Bobby sent one final message. No need. It was never about the send-off. And then he powered down the work phone, placed it on the kitchen counter when he got home, slid his badge next to it, took off the boots, placed them neatly in the closet, and sat on the edge of the bed, breathing in the quiet. Free. That evening, he cooked himself dinner. Something new. Grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, a cold iced tea, a small, quiet meal in a small, quiet apartment. The kind of meal that tasted like arrival. Not extravagance, just arrival. He went for a walk. No destination. Just him, the streetlights, and a city he'd once wandered with barely $200 in his name. He passed the bus stop he used to wait at when it rained. Walked by the first bank where he opened his savings account in 1984. And when he passed Booker T, Washington High, he paused. Just stood there. Let the silence settle. Let the years fall off him like dust. He was no longer the kid who mopped floors after school. He was no longer the man who gave up hot lunches to buy stocks. He was the man who had made it. Quietly. Completely. When he got home, he opened his notebook. A new page. He wrote at the top, post-work plans. Then underneath, daily walks before sunrise. Travel once per season. Host Sunday dinner for someone without family. Write down every money lesson I've learned. Teach a class, somewhere, somehow for free. Keep giving quietly. Keep living freely. Never forget the man with the mop. He set the pen down and smiled, not because it was the end, but because it was just the beginning. Most people think retirement is about escape, a beach, a golf course, endless leisure. But Bobby Ellison saw it differently. For him, retirement wasn't running away from work. It was finally having the power to run toward purpose. And that's exactly what he did. The first Monday of his retirement came without fanfare. No alarm clock. No ironed work uniform. No packed brown bag. Just a sunrise filtering through thin white curtains. A quiet kitchen. A cup of black coffee. Freedom didn't feel loud. It felt like silence where pressure used to be. It felt like waking up not because you had to, but because you could. Bobby sat at his table that morning, flipping through his notebook. He had written something at the bottom of a page 2 years ago. Freedom isn't the absence of responsibility. It's the presence of choice. And now, with more than $2.2 million to his name, no debts, and more income than expenses every month, Bobby had more choice than he'd ever known. But that didn't mean he wanted to do nothing. In fact, retirement stirred something more in him, not less. He remembered a quote from one of the old finance books. The goal isn't to stop working. It's to stop needing to work, so you can start doing the work that matters most. So Bobby made a new plan. He didn't call it a schedule. He called it his freedom framework. Mornings. He walked, not with headphones, not with a destination, just him in the sidewalks. Sometimes he passed the buildings he used to clean, nodded toward them like old friends. Sometimes he passed young professionals rushing toward elevators, their coffee cups sloshing, faces tight with deadlines. He didn't miss it, not because it had been bad, but because he had finished it. There's a quiet satisfaction in walking past the battlefield you no longer need to fight on. Middays. Bobby gave. He started volunteering at the local rec center, teaching financial literacy. Nothing complicated, just the basics, budgeting, avoiding debt, the power of time. It started with 5 students, then 10, then a waiting list. Most were teens, some were single moms, others were older men like Bobby had once been, tired, behind, and afraid it was too late. Bobby would smile and say, I started with $40 and a mop. You've got more than that. They believed him, because his story wasn't theory. It was real. It was proof. He never shared his net worth, never showed off, but his presence, calm, grounded, certain, carried weight. The way he held silence after someone asked a question, the way he could explain dividends without a chart, the way he told them that discipline is the most underrated superpower on earth. That's what made people listen. Afternoons. Bobby read. He reread old favorites. The Millionaire Next Door, The Simple Path to Wealth, Your Money or Your Life. He scribbled notes in the margins. Sometimes he'd take 2 buses to the library just to talk to the same librarian who helped him years ago. They'd swap recommendations, talk about how much had changed and how much hadn't. He even started writing a small spiral-bound journal, handwritten essays, stories, lessons, not for publication, just for posterity, for someone, someday, who might need to hear it from someone like him. Evenings. He gave. Not just money, though he did plenty of that. Every month, Bobby would pull cash from his legacy envelope and quietly distribute it. A single mom's grocery tab paid for anonymously. A surprise donation to a community scholarship fund. Books for the kids at the rec center, all wrapped with a sticky note that said, "For your future. Use well." Sometimes he'd buy pizza for the night janitorial staff in his old building. Always unsigned. Always quiet. They'd joke about the ghost millionaire. He just smiled, because Bobby never wanted to be seen giving. He wanted people to feel the result of what he learned. And if that was invisible, even better. But the biggest shift of all was internal. For the first time in his life, Bobby felt spacious. Not just in schedule, but in soul. There was no next bill to worry about. No next shift to rush to. No corner to cut just to make it another month. He'd outpaced all of that. And now, each moment felt fuller. Conversations went deeper. Laughter felt looser. Walks felt slower, on purpose. He felt whole. People asked him, sometimes, if he missed the rhythm of working. He'd shake his head, smile softly. "I still work," he'd say. "I just change what I work on." That's what they never tell you about retirement. It's not an ending. It's an unlocking. And Bobby Ellison, once a janitor, now a quiet millionaire, had unlocked something far more precious than wealth. He had unlocked purpose. And finally, after decades of invisible labor, he had time to give it away. He had passed that park 1,000 times. It sat just 4 blocks from his apartment, tucked between a daycare center and an old church with cracked steps and hymns that spilled onto the sidewalk on Sunday mornings. For years, Bobby had seen it only from a distance, through bus windows, while rushing home from work, or in passing, when his feet hurt too much to linger. But now, he had time. So one Wednesday morning, just after sunrise, Bobby stepped through the black iron gate and into the heart of it. The park was simple. A few winding paths, a duck pond, wooden benches with peeling green paint, trees that didn't seem to care about the city's noise. And that was the magic. It didn't ask for anything. It just was. Just like Bobby. He found his bench on the second day, under a magnolia tree, half sun, half shade, perfect for thinking. He brought a thermos of coffee, his notebook, and nothing else. No phone, no emails, no rush. He watched joggers pass, watched kids chase pigeons, watched an elderly couple share the same muffin every morning, always from the same paper bag. And he just breathed, not deeply, just freely, because for the first time in his life, Bobby wasn't using the park as a shortcut. He was using it as a sanctuary. People began to recognize him. The groundskeeper, Ms. Lila, who raked the leaves each week with soft gospel music playing from her pocket radio. The barista from the cafe across the street, who'd bring him an extra muffin some mornings. The little boy named Marcus who called him Mr. Bobby and always waved like they were old friends. They didn't know he was a millionaire. Didn't know he once held down 3 jobs to save enough for his first duplex. Didn't know he had paid off every debt and funded scholarships anonymously. They just knew him as the man under the magnolia tree. And Bobby liked it that way. He started writing more. Short stories, letters to his younger self, budgeting guides in plain language. He even toyed with starting a blog. He called it Dollar by Dollar. But he wasn't doing it for followers. He was doing it for the next Bobby. The one walking to work with a tired heart and a few wrinkled bills in their wallet, wondering if there's more to life than survival. He wanted to leave a trail of breadcrumbs. Not to fortune, but to freedom. On a Saturday, he sat beside a father and daughter feeding ducks. The girl, maybe 6, turned to him suddenly. "Are you retired?" Bobby smiled. "Yes, ma'am." She nodded like that made sense. "My daddy says he'll never retire. He says he's stuck." The father looked embarrassed. Bobby shook his head softly. Maybe not stuck. Maybe just waiting to figure it out. Then he pulled a folded napkin from his coat pocket. On it, he wrote something. "Start with $50. Invest every month. Don't stop. Let time do the heavy lifting." He handed it to the dad. No rush. Just a ripple. The man looked at it like a treasure. And Bobby stood up, stretched, and walked back to his bench, smiling. That was what the park gave him. Not just rest, but perspective. That true wealth wasn't just found in charts or net worth trackers. It was in time unhurried. in choices no longer bound by fear, in sharing knowledge without expecting praise, in sitting still enough to hear your own heartbeat say, "You made it." He made it a ritual. Same bench, same coffee, same stillness. And over time, he noticed something profound. His shoulders relaxed. His pace slowed. He smiled more, without realizing it. And the world, somehow, felt gentler. Because when you remove the pressure to hustle for survival, you start noticing beauty again. And for Bobby, that was the real dividend. Not dollars, but days. Days filled with birdsong instead of buzzing alarms. Sunlight instead of screen glare. Peace instead of panic. One day, a woman sat beside him, mid-40s, dressed like someone who used to earn six figures. She was quiet, just breathing, like she needed silence more than words. After a few minutes, she said, "I used to be a marketing director. Got laid off. Haven't figured out what to do next." Bobby nodded. "I used to be a janitor," he said. She looked at him sideways. Didn't speak. He added, "Retired now. Spent 40 years cleaning floors. And building something quiet." She blinked. "Ow." He pointed to the ducks. "You start with what you have. Feed one. Then two. Over time, you're feeding generations." She laughed, genuinely, and stayed a while longer. That's the part nobody sees about freedom. It echoes, even from a park bench, even from a man no one remembers from the corporate tower. Because some wealth isn't worn. It's lived. It started with one student, a teenage boy named Khalil, 14, hoodie always up, eyes like windows that had seen more than most men twice his age. He'd shown up at the rec center for a free pizza night, stayed for the money basics class because he had nowhere else to go. Bobby noticed him, didn't say much at first, just watched as Khalil folded his arms during every lesson, said nothing, asked nothing, until one day, Bobby posed a question to the group. "If you were given $100 today, what would you do with it?" Most of the kids laughed. "Shoes. Snacks. Something dumb, I won't lie," one said. "But Khalil?" He shrugged and mumbled, "Probably save it. I know it won't be enough anyway." Bobby paused. He'd heard that tone before. It wasn't apathy. It was armor. After class, Bobby caught up with him near the vending machines. "Mind if I walk you home?" Khalil looked skeptical. "I don't live far." "That's the best kind of walk," Bobby said with a smile. They walked in silence for a bit. Then Khalil asked, "You ever been broke?" Bobby chuckled. "I used to stretch peanut butter sandwiches 3 ways. Once paid rent with rolls of quarters." "What do you think?" Khalil cracked a smile. And that's when Bobby invited him over. It wasn't a palace. Just a 2-bedroom in a quiet part of town. Worn furniture. Clean walls. Smelled like coffee and old books. But what mattered was what was inside. Stacks of notebooks. Dozens of used budgeting journals. A bookshelf full of finance titles. Half from the library, half from secondhand stores. A calendar marked with dividend paydays in red. And in the center of the coffee table, a 3-ring binder labeled Freedom Blueprint. Bobby poured 2 glasses of sweet tea. "Let me show you something," he said. He flipped open the binder to a chart. It wasn't flashy, just a hand-drawn timeline. Starting with first stock purchase, $80, age 21. Ending with portfolio value, $2.1 million, age 61. Khalil's eyes widened. "You did this as a janitor?" "Yep." "Without a degree?" "Nope." "With what?" "Just saving. Saving. Investing. Time. Discipline." Khalil leaned forward. "You ever think about giving a TED Talk or something?" Bobby smiled. "I'm more of a living room kind of teacher." And so it began. One student. One story. One evening a week. Then Khalil brought a friend. Then 2 more. By spring, Bobby's living room turned into a financial literacy dojo. Fold-out chairs. Legal pads. Dollar store calculators. Pizza on paper plates. They called it Wealth Wednesdays. No lectures. Just lessons in plain language. Bobby taught what the textbooks didn't. How to set up a Roth IRA with your first job. How to budget when your paycheck hits and your fridge is empty. How to tell the difference between broke and undisciplined. How to say no without guilt. How to see time as your greatest asset when it feels like your enemy. He gave the visuals. Imagine every dollar as an employee. If you send them all out partying, you'll be broke in a week. But if you hire them to work for you, invest, save, they'll bring friends back over time. They laughed, but they got it. Because Bobby didn't talk down to them. He talked from where he'd been. Same sidewalks. Same tired nights. Same fear. But now, with light on the other side. One night, after most of the kids had left, Khalil stayed behind. "You know what I used to think rich people looked like," he said. Bobby looked up. "Like guys in suits. Fast cars. Loud. Shiny teeth." Bobby nodded. "And now?" Khalil smiled. "Now I think they look like you." Bobby didn't reply. Just nodded, eyes wet. Because sometimes, a single sentence weighs more than a portfolio. That summer, Bobby helped Khalil open his first custodial Roth IRA. Initial deposit, $250 from his part-time job. By the time fall came, for more students had accounts. They tracked their progress on a whiteboard in Bobby's living room. They competed, encouraged, learned. And Bobby, he sat back in his chair each week and thought, this is wealth. Not the compound interest, but the compound impact. It wasn't long before parents began reaching out. "Can you teach my daughter? My nephew just got his first job. Would you talk to him?" Bobby never said no. He just added chairs and another pot of coffee. There were no certificates, no course fees, no flashy slideshows. Just one man with a story, and a room full of hearts hungry to believe that maybe, just maybe, the climb was still possible. Because if a janitor could build a $3 million portfolio, maybe they could build a future too. That's what Bobby wanted. Not students. He wanted heirs. Not to his money, to his mindset, to his belief that the greatest inheritance you can give someone is the ability to believe in their own math. He once said it best to a student who asked if he missed the old life. "No, because I'm still working. Just changed my tools. Went from a mop to a marker. Still cleaning things up, just in a different way." In the world of investing, people talk about dividends, quarterly checks from companies, passive income. But Bobby Ellison came to understand a different kind of dividend. One more precious than money. One you can't see in your brokerage account. One no financial planner ever calls out on a spreadsheet. He called it the time dividend, and it paid him daily. It started with a cup of coffee, not one brewed in a rush, mouth still half asleep, shirt buttoned wrong. This one was different. It was a Tuesday morning. Light rain outside. Bobby stood in his kitchen barefoot, pouring slowly, humming a song his mother used to sing over the stove. He looked at the clock. 8:06 a.m. Once upon a time, that hour meant half a shift gone, 20 more toilets left, and aching arches in his feet. Now, it meant freedom. Time had changed from a taskmaster to a companion. He sat on his balcony as the steam curled from the cup, watching raindrops race down the power line like little kids chasing each other home. He didn't need to be anywhere. He didn't owe his time to anyone. No boss. No schedule. No, just one more shift. And that's when he felt it. The dividend. A payout in stillness. A return on decades of discipline. A sense of presence so deep it made him smile without knowing. The time dividend showed up in strange places, like the slow walks through the farmer's market, where he asked questions about spices he couldn't pronounce, because now he had time to learn. It showed up in phone calls. The kind you don't have to rush because you're late for something. He once spent 2 hours talking to a former coworker who'd fallen into debt. Bobby listened, gave no lectures, just stories, real ones. Then mailed the man a copy of Your Money or Your Life with a sticky note that read, "Start here. Call me after page 22. The man cried on the phone a week later. Another dividend. Paid in trust. He started cooking. Not just heating food, cooking. He watched YouTube chefs make stews from scratch. Bought a cast iron skillet. Grew basil on the windowsill. Tried risotto 3 times before getting it right. He cooked for himself with the same care he once gave to numbers. Measured. Patient. Intentional. Because he finally understood. You don't have to rush joy when time belongs to you. He visited his hometown once, took a bus, the long scenic route, sat in the back and watched the fields roll by like old memories. He walked past his childhood home, smaller than he remembered, windows fogged, paint chipped. He didn't knock, just stood there, closed his eyes, and whispered, "We made it." A moment paid not in interest, but in healing. Another dividend. At the rec center one day, a young woman asked, "What's the best thing money ever bought you?" He didn't answer right away. Took a sip of coffee. Watched the sunlight dance across the floor. Then he said softly, "Time to feel my life, not just survive it." She wrote that down in big letters, then underlined it twice. Because Bobby knew something few understood. Wealth isn't freedom from work. It's freedom from urgency. Freedom from fear. Freedom from living on the edge of burnout every single day. He once said it like this to a group. Money can buy you time, but only if you're brave enough not to trade it away for more stuff. They didn't all get it yet, but he knew one day they would. He watched the sunset that evening from his balcony. The sky a mix of lavender and gold. And he thought, this is the real ROI. Not what you earn, but what you no longer lose. Not time filled, but time returned. Like a friend you thought was gone forever, finally sitting beside you again. That's the time dividend. And for Bobby Ellison, it was worth more than every dollar in his portfolio. There are two kinds of old men. Those who live with what-ifs, and those who live with peace. Bobby Ellison belonged to the second group. Not because he made every perfect decision, but because he made every decision with intention. He had lived his life like someone folding origami, slow, deliberate creases, quiet transformations. And now, in his mid-60s, Bobby looked back not with longing, but with gratitude. It was a rainy afternoon when he opened the shoebox, the same one he'd carried through 3 apartments, 2 property purchases, and 40 years of change. Inside were relics of a life built in silence. His first stock certificate, Johnson & Johnson, 1984. A letter from the bank congratulating him on paying off his duplex in full. The original Freedom Blueprint, binder cover, creased and worn. A photograph of his mother, standing in front of the hospital where she worked overtime until her liver failed. A folded note that read, "Future Bobby deserves this." He sat with them like old friends, traced the edges of the certificate, ran his fingers over the faded ink on the letter, and smiled. Because while others collected souvenirs from beaches and trips, Bobby had collected proof that doing the hard thing again and again quietly wasn't foolish. It was sacred. He remembered the temptations, the pressure to buy the new truck, to upgrade the apartment, to chase what everyone else called normal. He never hated those things. He just chose something else, something slower, something quieter. And when he thought about those trade-offs, those moments he chose rice and beans over restaurants, books over bars, savings over splurges, he didn't feel regret. He felt respect for the man he used to be, for the version of himself who stood firm when it wasn't easy. He whispered, "Thank you," into the room, as if that man were still here. And in a way he was. People asked him sometimes, "Don't you wish you'd lived more?" He'd laugh softly. "You mean spent more?" They'd fumble. "No, I mean like traveled, did wild things." He'd shrug. "I built a life I didn't need to escape from." Then pause. "And I'm still living it." Because Bobby didn't need regrets. He needed reminders of how every small choice mattered, of how every quiet decision turned into a louder freedom. One night, he wrote a letter. It wasn't for anyone specific, just for the world. If you ever wonder if it's worth it, to say no when everyone else says yes, to bring your own lunch, to skip the vacation and invest the money, to walk instead of drive, to read instead of spend, know this. You're not missing out. You're opting in to dignity, to power, to a future where you breathe without flinching. I was called cheap. I was called boring. But now I'm called free. And that's a name I'd never trade. He folded it, tucked it into his binder, smiled. There were many paths Bobby didn't take. He never married, never had children, never lived in a big house, never wore a Rolex or sat in business class. But he had no regrets, because what he did have was peace, was presence, was impact, quiet, consistent, and far-reaching. He had students who called him their first mentor, tenants who never forgot his kindness, a checking account that never bounced, and mornings filled with stillness instead of alarm clocks. One Sunday, sitting under a tree in the park, Bobby watched a young father run with his daughter. They laughed, fell into the grass. He watched, hand resting gently over his heart. He had no family of his own, no lineage, but he didn't feel alone. Because legacy, Bobby believed, wasn't about blood. It was about breadcrumbs, about leaving trails for others to find their way home. And he had left many, in notebooks, in quiet scholarships, in whispered advice at bus stops and rec centers, in decisions made decades ago that no one saw, but that would echo long after he was gone. He closed his eyes, breathed deep, and thought to himself, if I had to do it all again, I'd walk the same road, shoes and all. He never planned to write a book. He wasn't a writer, At least, not the kind who ever dreamed of publishing. But by the time Bobby turned 68, the pages had begun to gather. Notebooks, journals, folded napkins scribbled with metaphors and mantras, a lifetime of numbers and philosophies. And now, as he sat by his window with the afternoon sun crawling across the rug, he realized something. He'd been writing a book his whole life. He just hadn't known it yet. It wasn't for bookstores. It wasn't for bestseller lists or speaking tours. It was for one person, the future version of someone like him. Tired, broke, doubtful, standing at the edge of adulthood with calloused hands and 100 questions. The kind of person who didn't need perfection, just proof. Proof that discipline beats genius, that silence can build fortunes, that the janitor might just retire richer than the executive upstairs. He opened a new composition notebook, thick, sturdy, unlined. And on the first page, in clean, deliberate letters, he wrote, "What I wish I knew at 20. He started with the basics. Lesson 1. Time is your teammate, not your enemy. He wrote about compounding, about patience. He told the story of his first $80 investment in Johnson & Johnson and how he nearly sold it too early. Don't look at the scoreboard, he wrote. Water the roots. Lesson 2. Every dollar has a job. Make sure you're the boss. He talked about budgeting like a foreman talked about tools. Each dollar should be directed, not wandered. Spending wasn't the enemy. Wandering was. Lesson 3. Quiet beats loud in the long run. He reflected on the coworkers who laughed at his brown bag lunches and called him cheap. Let them laugh, he wrote. They'll be renting long after you've paid off your place. Lesson 4. Wealth is what you don't see. He underlined that 3 times. No one congratulates you for not buying a new car, but your future self will. Each night, he added more. Stories, failures, breakdowns, breakthroughs. He wrote about the first time he gave money away and how it changed him. The moment he realized owning time was more powerful than owning things. The myth of not enough that followed him for years, and how to kill it slowly, with action. Sometimes he'd write only a sentence, but it carried the weight of decades. You're not broke. You're early. You don't need more money. You need more clarity. The world sells speed. Freedom is built slowly. He wasn't writing a memoir. He was writing a roadmap, with muddy footprints, not perfect quotes. After 6 months, the book was nearly done. He titled it simply, Dollar by Dollar, A Janitor's Guide to Quiet Wealth. He printed 5 copies of the library down the street, staple-bound, black and white. He gave one to the rec center, one to Khalil, one to the church library, one to the city's public high school counselor, and one he tucked inside a time capsule box beneath his bed, labeled, For whoever needs it most when I'm gone. He didn't need applause. He didn't need to go viral. Because Bobby knew something most influencers didn't. Real power isn't in being heard by millions. It's in being felt by one person who actually needed to hear you. That winter, he went back to the park. Same bench, same thermos, same view. But this time, he wasn't just watching ducks. He was watching the future walk past him. Backpack slung, shoes worn, eyes full of fire and fatigue. He smiled, because somewhere in those crowds, he knew someone would stumble across his book one day and find what they didn't even know they needed. Not a financial plan, but a mirror. One that whispered, if I could do it, so can you. That was his final lesson. Not written in ink, but in life. That if you build quietly, live wisely, and give generously, you never really disappear. You echo. He never heard the applause, never stood on a stage, never saw the likes or follows or shares. But Bobby Ellison's words, those scribbled sentences in the margins of cheap notebooks, traveled farther than he ever imagined. Because truth, when wrapped in humility and lived with integrity, has a way of moving without permission. It seeps, it spreads, it multiplies, like ripples in still water. And Bobby, he had dropped the pebble. It started small. The rec center laminated a few pages from his dollar by dollar book and posted them in the hallway. Start with what you have. Every dollar is an employee. Give it a job. Quiet money lasts longer. Students began copying them into their phones. One kid turned them into posters. Another printed shirts. It wasn't a brand. It wasn't monetized. It was a movement. Accidental and honest. A ripple. Khalil, his first student, now ran financial workshops at the local community college. He'd often open his presentations with a slide showing an old mop and a quote that read, "Build something so solid that nobody ever sees you sweat until they see your freedom." He always said, "I got this from Bobby." He never taught from a book. He was the book. And when students asked if they could meet him, Khalil would smile. "You already have. Every time you show up, take notes, and live below your means." That's him. At the high school where Bobby had once mopped floors as a boy, a teacher found one of his printed booklets in the counselor's office. She read it in a single sitting, then passed it to a student who had just lost his mother and was thinking of dropping out to work full-time. The boy read it twice, then opened his first savings account, then earned his GED, then applied to a trade school. He sent a thank you card to Mr. Bobby the janitor, not even knowing if the man was still alive. Bobby got it 3 weeks later and cried. He didn't reply. He didn't need to. The ripple had done its work. A nonprofit in Birmingham picked up the guide, then a community bank in Tallahassee, then a prison literacy program in Louisiana. They didn't ask for copyright, didn't pay licensing fees. Bobby didn't care. He just said, use it. Just keep the message intact. Because he knew this wasn't his message. It belonged to anyone who had ever gone without. Anyone who had learned to stretch $5 into hope. Anyone who had built their future not from inheritance or genius, but from discipline, brown bag lunches, and a refusal to quit. He was sitting on a bench at the park one afternoon when a young woman approached. She was out of breath, a little nervous. "Excuse me, are you Mr. Ellison?" He blinked. "Depends. Who's asking?" She held up a phone. On it was a screenshot of a quote from his book. "You don't know me, but this saved my life. I was in a shelter last year. Someone passed around pages from your guide. I started budgeting with a dollar store notebook. I just paid off my first credit card." Bobby looked at her, then nodded once. "I'm proud of you." She sat beside him, said nothing else. They just listened to the wind together. A ripple returned. Legacy isn't about being remembered. It's about what happens because you lived. And Bobby, he had built a living, breathing legacy. One budget sheet at a time. One conversation at a time. One envelope at a time. He used to think he was invisible. Now, his story had reached people he would never meet. And in that, he found something even deeper than pride. He found peace. Because in a world where so many chase relevance, Bobby had chosen resonance. And resonance echoes forever. He kept the notebook until the end. The same one he'd used for decades. Black cover, worn edges, frayed spine. Inside, his whole life was recorded. Not in paragraphs, but in practice. On his 72nd birthday, Bobby Ellison sat by the window with his feet wrapped in a fleece blanket and a cup of lukewarm tea beside him. He had just come home from the clinic. The tests were back. Stage 4. They said he might have 6 months. Maybe less. He didn't flinch. Didn't cry. He just turned to the last page in the notebook. At the top, in steady handwriting, he wrote, "Final balance sheet." He wasn't interested in tallying dollars. That account had crossed $3.1 million last winter, with dividends now paying over $5,000 per month. More than enough. No, this sheet was different. It wasn't about money. It was about meaning. Time spent freely. 12 years since retirement. 4,380 mornings without an alarm. Nearly 1,200 days spent walking at his own pace. Countless moments lived unrushed. Lessons taught. 87 Wealth Wednesday students. Over 1,000 budgeting handouts given away. 3 students who became financial coaches. 6 who bought their first homes. Dozens who broke generational cycles. Gifts given. $245,000 in anonymous donations. 3 emergency rent payments for single parents. 7 scholarships created in his name, quietly. 1 rec center library built with his funds. Debt left behind. $0. Regrets. None. He paused at that word. None. Bobby leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the stillness wrap around him. He thought of all the people who had passed him in those high-rise buildings. All the polished shoes that never noticed the man cleaning their floor. He thought of every dollar he didn't spend. Every investment that grew while he slept. Every moment he stayed silent when others showed off. He thought of the boy he used to be. The one who thought life would always feel like survival. And he smiled. Because it hadn't. Because he had changed it. Not all at once. Not with genius. But slowly. Dollar by dollar. In his final weeks, Bobby gave away the last of his notebooks. One to Khalil, one to a girl at the park who had once shared her chips with him, one to the rec center, and one he mailed anonymously to a financial YouTuber whose videos he enjoyed but thought needed less flash and more truth. He didn't explain, just wrote in the front cover, "Tell them it's not about the money. It's about what money frees you from and what it frees you for. That's the real balance sheet." Bobby, on the morning of his passing, he was found in his favorite chair, blanket over his legs, a gentle smile on his face, his teacup still half full, and on the table his last act, a sealed envelope labeled, "For whoever needs it next." Inside, a check for $25,000. And a note, "I started with nothing. I built it slow. I gave it away because I could. Now it's your turn. Don't make it loud. Just make it matter." They buried him in a quiet plot overlooking the city. No headlines, no viral videos. But word spread. A small group gathered. Former students, tenants. One man who once got an anonymous envelope that saved his home. They brought brown paper bags instead of flowers, wrote down their favorite quotes from Bobby, and pinned them to the fence. The rec center closed for the day. The church bells rang 5 times, once for every decade of discipline. And somewhere in the city, a teenager opened a used copy of Dollar by Dollar, turned to a random page, and read, "You're not your paycheck. You're your practices. And if you build slowly, they will carry you somewhere solid." The teen whispered, "Who is this guy?" And just like that, the ripple continued. Bobby Ellison never made Forbes, never went viral, never stood behind a podium. But he left behind something bigger than fame. A life built on purpose, a $1 million soul, a final balance sheet that could never be audited, only felt. And through his quiet acts, his silent strength, and his boundless discipline, he taught us all that you don't need to be loud to be legendary. Resolution and lesson. We spend so much time looking for shortcuts, so much time chasing loud voices, fast wins, quick answers. But Bobby Ellison showed us something different, something deeper. That true wealth isn't loud. It doesn't need validation. It doesn't need recognition. Because real freedom, lasting, unshakable, quiet freedom, is built one decision at a time. One sandwich packed instead of bought. One stock held instead of sold. One lesson passed instead of forgotten. And that when you do this not for attention, but for autonomy, not for ego, but for enough, you wake up one day and realize you don't need more. You already have what matters most. Bobby never owned a yacht, but he owned every second of his morning. He never earned a 6-figure paycheck, but he paid himself first for 40 years. And in the end, he gave more than most ever will, because he had built a life that could afford to give. That's the lesson. Not just how to grow a portfolio, but how to grow a life. Patiently, quietly, powerfully. You don't have to be brilliant. You don't have to be born into wealth. You just have to be consistent. And you have to start. Wherever you are, whatever you make. Start. Automate. Discipline. Stay. Because one day, the life you're quietly building will speak for itself. If Bobby's story moved you, if it lit a spark or shifted your mindset, don't let it end here. Subscribe to Dollar by Dollar for more real stories of quiet financial freedom. Drop a comment. What's the first Bobby habit you're going to build this week? We read every one. And if you know someone who needs this story, someone quietly doing the work, unseen and underappreciated, share this with them. Let them know they're not invisible. They're just early. Dollar by Dollar.